Hey guys, we are jumping into week 2. This whole week is about the patriarchs in the Bible. One of these stories, actually a couple of these stories, are some of my favorite in the whole Bible. So I'm not going to read everything that's in here because you guys can read. So I'm just going to hit some highlights and stuff that I think that are really interesting, things that I really enjoyed getting to know about these people. So anyway, remember all of the lineage stuff that we had talked about that we kind of skim over a lot of the time? Well, on day 1, we find out that Noah's sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, Noah, who was the only person that was found righteous in God's eyes, right? The one who saved the entire world. Well, he got drunk and fell out naked on a beach. Well, one of his sons made fun of him, and the other 2 sons, they got a cloak and they tried to spare his dignity or whatever, and they walked backwards with the cloak so they wouldn't look upon his nakedness. That was a sin, and they covered him with it. So one of his sons, Shem, was one that Noah blessed. Well, Shem's descendant was Terah. Terah is actually Abraham's father. So this is where the lineage stuff kind of comes in handy. So in Genesis 11:31, it says, Terah took a son, Abram, his grandson Lot, which was his brother Haran's son, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, he's still Abram right now, Abram's wife. And they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there, and Terah lived 205 years and then died in Haran. And so this is where we get into the call of Abram. Now, when the call of Abram happens, he is actually like 75 years old. He is not a young cat by any stretch of the imagination. So he's 75 years old. Verse 12 says, Then the Lord said to Abraham, Go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to a land that I will show you. So leave your family, leave your home, leave everything that you know, and just start walking. And when you get there, I'll let you know. Right? I mean, how many of us are really going to do that? I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who treat you with contempt. And all of the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Remember, Jesus is a descendant from Abram. Just file that back. That's that's important. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. Just blind obedience. Just, okay, you said go, I'm going to go. I'm going to pack it up and I'm going to do what you say, and I'm just going to start walking until you tell me to stop. That I wish I had obedience and faith like that. Let's see. That was a huge leap of faith. So they ended up getting to Canaan, and this is where God tells Abram that this is the land that I'm going to give to you and your offspring. But there was a famine in Canaan, so they didn't hang out there long. They didn't stay. So they head to Egypt, okay? There's some weird stuff with his wife. Abram's wife is actually his half-sister. She is the daughter of Terah by another woman. You have to remember that there's not a lot to choose from back then, so the whole incest thing was a thing back then, but whatever. Anyway, so they get to Egypt, and then Lot and Abram decide that they're going to split up. And Abram says, you pick which way you want to go, and whichever way you go, I'll go the opposite, because their herd and their shepherds and their people weren't getting along because there were so many of them, so they needed to split up. So they go Where's it at? Where's it at? Lot goes to Sodom. Bad choice. So Sodom and Gomorrah was a place that they did not follow God. It was very much a pagan culture. They were very perverse. There was rapes and prostitution and just sin running completely rampant. There was absolutely no law there. And for Lot, who was raised up as a godly man, you just being close to that kind of environment kind of pulls you in, and you end up living for the world more than you end up living for God. And this was something that we see time and time again in the Bible, that, depending on who you surround yourself with kind of depends on how well you do in your walk with God, I guess. So he started on the outside of the city of Sodom. Well, as you read, it ends up that he actually ends up right in the middle of the city, and just trying to be on the outside, that still just kind of roped him right into the ungodliness and the paganism and the perverseness of that place. So Abram is literally walking with God. He's walking with God and his two angels. And it said, the Lord said, should I hide what I am about to do from Abraham? By this time, his name has been changed. Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. This is how the Lord will fulfill Abraham and what he promised. So God is walking with Abraham, and he is telling him about the judgment that he has passed on Sodom and Gomorrah. God doesn't need Abraham's permission. I mean, he's God. But God is using this moment to teach Abraham how to be a leader and how to be the leader of a nation, and that there are going to be some really tough decisions that he has to make. And this is one of those things. All of these people that are doing all of these terrible things, these are still God's children. So he's a parent. This is not an easy decision for him to make. So he's trying to teach Abraham that there are going to be some times that you have to really make some tough decisions, but you do it for the greater good of the nation. You do it for the greater good of the rest of the people, because this way of life and this living for the world, it is infectious and it is toxic, and it will seep into every aspect of everybody's life. So he's just trying to teach him that there are going to be some really tough decisions that you have to make. So he goes on, and Abraham actually ends up talking God into saving Lot. So the angels go to get Lot, and this mob of men are banging on Lot's door because they saw these angels and they want to rape them. And they're telling Lot, give us these men, or we're going to come in, we're going to break your door down, and we're going to rape them anyway. So this is the kind of city that he's living in. This place is a freaking cesspool of just evil, just evil. So the angel tells Lot, grab your wife, grab your kids, go, just start running, and whatever you do, don't look back. Well, everybody but the wife did what they were supposed to do. She turned around and looked back. Why did she do that? Well, because sometimes it's hard for us to leave our old life behind. Sometimes it's hard for us to leave what is familiar behind. And so she turned around to get one last look, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So, bad choice, sister. Anyway, moving on. So in Genesis 15:5, get back over here. He took him outside and said, look at the sky and count the stars. This is God talking to Abraham again. Then he said to him, your offspring will be that numerous. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Now, you have to remember, Abraham and Sarah have been married for a long time. They are old, and they still don't have any children. But God is promising Abraham to make him a great nation through his offspring. And, I mean, he ain't got no offspring. So he's kind of, okay, I believe you. Trusting in you, pal. But nothing's happened yet. So God makes that covenant with him. And that was pretty cool. Here we go. All right, day 2. Ishmael and Isaac. So Sarah is old, and she gets tired of waiting for God to fulfill his promise because God needs help from us, right? He does not need help from us. This is how things get screwed up. So she decided, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you my maidservant to have sex with, and you're going to get her pregnant, but that child will be mine. Because legally, back then, that's how it worked. The wife could give her slave to her husband, and they would marry, but whatever children they had would actually belong to the woman of the household, would actually belong to her. So in her mind, this is how we're going to help God out. This is how we're going to fulfill the promise. That's not how this works. But God tells Hagar, the slave woman that she gave to Abraham, that Ishmael will be at odds with his brothers. That's true. He will be at odds with his brothers. Fun fact, Ishmael and Isaac their people are still at odds today. Ishmael is, they're the Arab people. They're the Arabic people, and Isaac are the people of Israel. To this very day, these two countries hate each other. They fight over religion. They fight over property lines. They fight over money. They still fight to this day. This is thousands of years later. The war between these two countries is biblical. It's been that way for years. So, blah, blah, blah. God tells Abraham about this boy in verse 19 that God will confirm his covenant with him and his future offspring. So, let's see. Abraham is 99 years old. Sarah is like 89, I think, and she's pregnant. Okay? I want you to just think about the 89-year-old women that we take care of. And can you imagine them pregnant? Yeah, me neither. So, moving on. This is probably one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And it's something that I really love. So, the first couple of times I read this, I was like, this is insane. Why would God ask somebody to... Anyway, the sacrifice of Isaac. After Hagar and Ishmael are sent away, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I shall tell you. Okay, so again, God speaks to Abraham and says, go. And you keep walking until I tell you to stop. Plot twist, when you get there, you're going to sacrifice your son to me. And Abraham says, okay, I trust you. God's promise, remember God's promise that he will confirm the covenant with Abraham through his offspring with Sarah, not with Hagar, okay? So, God tests Abraham. I'm just going to read this little bit to you here. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took with him 2 of his young men and his son Isaac. This is Genesis chapter 22, starting at verse 3. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. So they walked for 3 days. So for 3 days, he's thinking in his head that he's got to kill his son. Then Abraham said to the young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there to worship, and we'll come back." So here's what struck me, is Abraham is telling his servants, hey, we're going to go over there and worship. We'll be back. So one of 2 things has happened. Either he has so much trust and faith in God that he can raise his son Isaac from the dead, or that God is going to make a way where there seems like there is no way, and him and his son are coming down off of that hill. Period. End of story. It's happening. We'll be back. So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. So here's also what you need to know. Isaac is about 14 years old right here. He's not a little infant he's carrying up the thing. This is almost a grown man. He is 14 years old. Not once does it say in this Bible that Isaac fought his dad. It says that he laid him on the thing. Isaac carried his wood up this hill on his back. What does that remind you of? What does that put a picture of in your head? Okay, this is like the foretelling of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, okay? Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. In his hand he took the fire and the sacrificial knife, and the 2 of them walked together. Then Isaac spoke to his father Abraham and said, "My father." And he replied, "Here I am, my son." Isaac said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Then the 2 of them walked on together. This was a prophecy. This hill that they are walking up to sacrifice Isaac is the same hill that Jesus was crucified on 2,000 years later. It just blows my mind. When they arrived at the place that God had told them about, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. Still, Isaac's not questioning a thing. He bound his son Isaac and placed him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." He replied, "Here I am." And then he said, "Do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your only son from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Then Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." So today it is said, "It will be provided on the Lord's mountain." So he had prophesied that the Lord would provide a lamb, right? But Abraham looked up and he saw a ram, not a lamb. The lamb in the Bible is like a perfect sacrificial animal, and that lamb was perfect. It didn't have any blemishes. It didn't have any spots. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. When a lamb is sacrificed in the Bible, it is a perfect lamb. There's nothing wrong with it. But he looked up and he saw a ram with horns. So 2,000 years later, God provided the lamb, which was Jesus Christ. It just blows my mind how awesome the Bible is when you really start studying. It's just so cool. So Abraham passed the test. Woo! Then we go to day 3. I'm trying to get through this pretty quick. I'm already at 19 minutes in this, and I'm only got to day 3. So day 3, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob. Rebekah is Isaac's wife. Abraham made sure that there was this perfect bride that was picked for him. She gets pregnant with twins, Esau and Jacob. They literally fight in the womb. They will always be at odds with each other. They're destined to fight. So when they come out, Esau comes out first. So he is technically the firstborn. He is the one who is supposed to get all of the blessing and all of the stuff, because that's the way that the law worked back then. But when he came out, his brother literally had hold of his heel. It's weird, right? So that's what his name means. His name actually means heel grabber. So if you have any children named Jacob, that's what their name means. Esau ends up giving his birthright to Jacob because he's hungry. It was instant gratification instead of, I don't know. Esau's not very smart. He's kind of a stupid man. So he gives his birthright away, his blessing, his everything that he's supposed to get, his inheritance. He gives it to Jacob over a bowl of stew. Jacob and Rebekah, they are kind of deceitful. Rebekah, it comes from a good place. Jacob is her favorite kid because he's kind of a little dork. And Esau is the big manly man, you know, provide for the people and go out there and kill stuff and feed everybody. He's a different guy. So her little baby is Jacob. Her heart's in the right place. But Jacob was preordained by God to be greater than his brother. There was no need to trick anybody. There was no need to do anything because remember, God's promises, he doesn't need our help. This is where we screw up, is when we think that God needs our help. And sure enough, he has to flee and he goes to hang out with his uncle, and he sees this girl and he's got the hots for her and he wants to marry her. And the uncle says, "You bet, brother, but you're going to work for me for 7 whole years to be able to marry her." And then the uncle tricks him into marrying the ugly sister. Ugh, word. And then has to work another 7 years to marry the one that he wanted to marry in the first place. Deceit, lies, trickery, trying to help God. Everything gets blown way out. So stupid. Let's see. Oh, Rachel bears a son, Joseph. Love Joseph, sweet little Joseph. He's also in the next little story. So Joseph is now Jacob's favorite. All of this stuff happens. They have all of these kids. There's a bunch of turmoil between Rebekah and her sister Leah, and it's a bunch. But anyway, they're gonna move back to their hometown, right? He has to face Esau. Now, he left thinking that Esau was gonna kill him. And he's got all this fear and all of this anxiety about going and facing his brother. And he is kind of a wimp and a coward. And so he sends the women and the children ahead of him. I mean, who does that? But he ends up meeting a man on the side of the river, and they wrestle all night. They fight all night long. And he comes out with a dislocated hip. And I mean, he's wrestling with God. And like the whole point of this is God is trying to tell him, is trying to make him understand, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to have this fear. Give me those things. Instead of wrestling with this, give it to me. Let me have it. And your life doesn't have to be this way. So that he wrestles with God, and God dislocates his hip, because you can't really have a true encounter with God and remain the same. So God gave him this limp to remind him that he is solely dependent on God and that he doesn't have to live this way. And once you realize that, and once you make that commitment and you understand that this is his show, then life gets a whole lot easier, because all of these things that we're trying to control and all of these things that we're so afraid of, we have no control over that. So that's what the fight at the bank of the river was about him giving up control and him giving up the fear and the anxiety. And him and Esau meet, and it's all hugs and love and crying and forgiveness. It is such a beautiful story of forgiveness and letting things go and trusting God to do what he says that he's going to do. So really love that story. So day 4 from Jacob to Israel, Esau comes and he runs and he hugs him and all of this wonderful stuff. And Jacob takes his family to Bethel, and he has 12 sons. He actually has a daughter or two in there too, but he has 12 sons. Jacob is renamed Israel, and his 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. One of his sons, Levi, the Levites are actually the priest of if you're a Levite, you are a priest. That's what you're born into. That's what you are raised to do. You are a priest. So that's where part of the 12 tribes of Israel come from. It's from Jacob. And then real quick, okay. So one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, or Israel, now he's Israel. One of his sons, Joseph, he is the second to the youngest. Remember what I said about the oldest is the one who normally gets all of the blessings, and he's normally the leader of the family. Well, Jacob, or Israel, had given Joseph a lot of responsibility at a very, very young age. He put him in charge of things that he shouldn't have been in charge of, according to law. So he has this dream in Genesis 37, 1 through 11. Let's see if I can find it real quick. 1 through 11. He was 17 years old, by the way. Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. His brothers saw that their father loved him more, and all of his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peacefully to him. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf, whatever. Are you really going to reign over us?" His brothers asked. "Are you really going to rule us?" So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he said. Well, turns out, brothers, he actually is. So they plotted to kill him. But one of his brothers, Reuben, was like, don't kill him. Let's just throw him in a hole. And they ended up selling him to some people. I forgot who they sold him to. Blah, blah, blah. Throw him in the pit in the wilderness. Don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to his father. So Reuben really had good intentions. He was going to go back and get him out of the hole later. They sold him to the Ishmaelites. Remember Ishmael, Isaac? Bad guys. Remember? They don't get along. So they sold their brother to the bad guys, basically. Not nice. And so he ended up a slave. But God is so good. He ends up saving everybody. He makes friends with the Pharaoh, then he gets thrown back in prison, and then he makes friends with the Pharaoh again because he interprets a dream for him. And he also warns the Pharaoh about this 7 years of famine that's coming up. So they had collected all of this food, all this water, and all of this stuff to save the people of Egypt. Turns out he also saves his brothers and his family because they come to him not knowing that it's him. They come to him and get food, and he knows who they are immediately, but they don't recognize him. And this awesome story plays out, and it ends up that Joseph says, y'all don't be upset with what you did to me because I know that God sent me ahead of you. So this is a perfect picture of something that is terrible and tragic that happens in our lives, that sometimes God is preparing something for us that's greater later. He was imprisoned. He was sold into slavery. But had he not been there, he wouldn't have been able to save the people of Egypt. He wouldn't have been able to save his family. He wouldn't have been able to see his father and his brother, and he wouldn't be able to save the lives of all of these people. This literally happened to save the world. So sometimes when something really terrible happens, we don't see the big picture, but God does. So that's what this is a story of. And I just love the story of Joseph and everything that happens with him. So y'all read that. It's really, really cool. Just real quick, I want to recap. There are some people that God uses in the Bible that God doesn't follow man's law. He follows his law. Like all of these people, they should have never been leaders. They should have never been great because of who they were born to. They weren't born kings. They weren't born priests. They were just ordinary people. And Abraham, we always talk about his faith, but him and Sarah at one point, they lost faith in God and they did their own thing. He was not a perfect Christian. Samson, when you read about Samson in the Bible, he was preordained before birth to be an instrument of God to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. He had one weakness, and that was women. He was incredibly stupid, and God used him despite his poor choices. He did not walk with God, but God empowered him multiple times throughout his story to fulfill what God had intended for him. Whether he was doing what he was supposed to do or not, God still used him. He was not a perfect Christian. Moses, the prince of Egypt, the man who God considered his friend, laid to rest by God himself. God literally laid him to rest himself. Read the story of Moses. He had speech problems and he lacked self-confidence. He also was a murderer. God used him to free his people from Egypt. He was not a perfect Christian. Peter, Jesus' disciple, he was a simple fisherman. He was actually denied Jesus 3 times in public to save his own butt. He was impulsive and sometimes he lacked good judgment. He wasn't a perfect Christian. God doesn't use the qualified. He qualifies the people that he calls. If he used the qualified, there's no way that I would be doing this or teaching a discipleship group at my church. Anybody can do this. Your story and your testimony matter. It matters to other people. Most Christians did not get turned on to Jesus by this. They got turned on to Jesus by the way that somebody else presented themselves and the way that somebody else acted to reflect Jesus. That's what gets people interested in God. That's what gets people interested in church. Invite somebody to church this week. Invite them to a small group. Invite them to a Bible study. Just reach out because that's what God has called us to do. He's called us to be disciples and to teach his word. And once you start, you just can't stop. It's just so awesome. But anyway, if y'all have any questions this week, please let me know. I love you guys. I'm always here if y'all want to meet. I'm always willing to do that. So you guys reach out if you need something, and I'll see you next week. Bye.